He's the sole American to graduate from the École Supérieure Nationale des Arts de la Marionnette in Charleville, Mézières, France. So highlights of his work have included Petrushka, Dokugashki, and of course the award-winning Symphonie Fantastique. His productions have toured worldwide, and he has collaborated with leading artists in basically every performing arts genre, including Christopher Wheeldon, Plopolis, the Joe Good Dance Company. He's directed opera with the Gotham Chamber Opera, presented at Lincoln Center and Spoleto USA, and done theater with Oscar Eustis and the Public Theater with Shakespeare in the Park. On Broadway, he created and staged the Puppetry in the Addams Family, for which he won a Drama Desk Award, and he worked with Lee Brewer as the designer and co-director of A Streetcar Named Desire. Here comes a list of awards that he's received, which include an Obie, a Drama Desk, 5 UMA Awards, 2 Bessies, a New York Innovative Theater Award, a Henry Hughes Award, a Guggenheim, a USA Artists Fellowship, and Doris Duke Performing Artist Award. Most recently, his Rite of Spring, which was presented as a ballet without dancers, made its world premiere in 2013. We are pleased to welcome him back for his second year as a More Visiting Artist, which is a program designed to bring notable artists to teach students for a full quarter, and is supported by Nancy and Larry Moore. I'm pleased to welcome Basil.
Thank you. Thank you to the Stanford Arts Institute for having me, and thank you, Barry and Nancy, especially for having me come back again. I was here last year as a visiting artist, and I really enjoyed it. And so I said, I'd love to come back, and I'm back. So I'm really happy about that. Well, I just wanted to actually give some sort of talk, some sort of public connection while I've been out here, because yes, I am from California, and it's just nice to put myself out there. And actually, Emily suggested, why don't you do it in the Anderson collection, which was such a neat idea. It's such an incredible building and collection. If you haven't seen it yet, we'll get a chance after the talk. And her thought was, because I have done some of my work has veered into abstraction, and so it seemed like maybe that would be interesting to kind of speak to that, particularly while we're in this building and about my work. So let's do that. I've been into puppetry ever since I was a kid, but I did have this incredible experience where I went to this puppetry school in France that not many people do puppet school. Not many puppeteers actually go to school, but I did. I went to this amazing school, and it was in France, and it really prompted me to think a lot about art and puppetry in the context of other arts. And puppetry in general is quite a marginalized art form. And when you're sort of in a country like France and you get to see all the other, this great arts education, and you see how much puppetry is sort of like not, sort of as marginalized, it just hasn't developed in the same way. There's not the same sort of consensus about like where puppetry is going in terms of the way that, say, in visual arts, there's all these artistic movements that we're all familiar with, and puppetry hasn't really benefited from that. And in particular, there was a festival of music and puppetry that happened, and I thought I would see something actually that would actually present something abstract, because it seems like, at least in the 20th century, really the beginning of so many important artistic movements was abstraction in the beginning of the 20th century. Kandinsky and other artists who started not trying to represent something, not trying to paint a painting that looked like a person or a thing, but just to do pure color or pure shape. And I thought I might see something like that in this festival, and I actually didn't. Even though there were some very kind of modernist designs, you could always tell this triangle or that circle were somehow anthropomorphized, and we would understand them as that's a girl and that's a boy. And so I really wanted to actually create a show. I wanted to see a show that was completely abstract, and so I decided that I would create it. So that was this piece, Symphonie Fantastique, which I did in 1998, and it really started so much of the career that I had. So I want to show a clip of it, of Symphony, and we'll see what it's about. Of note, Symphonie Fantastique was presented underwater, so it was in a giant aquarium, and this is just a really brief clip that will show some of the images. So there was kind of Christmas tinsel, and there was lights and fabric and feathers and bubbles and more Christmas tinsel and more fabric and more weird tubes and floaty wool toys and kind of anything that I could use to sort of create life in the tank without it necessarily looking like something. It wasn't meant to look like most puppetry that we're familiar with. You take cloth or you take wood and you carve it and you shape it to make it look like something. You want it to look like something we're familiar with. So it's actually, it's representational, it's a signifier, it signifies something else, something other than what it is. And we kind of fall into that, and we all say, oh, it looks like a person, or it looks like a little girl, or it looks like a horse, or oh, that horse doesn't look quite right. But what if you were just to take materials purely as they were, and to kind of give them the opportunity to be who they were and what they did, and make them come to life, and to make something that's inanimate come to life without it trying to be something else. And that was the idea behind Symphonie Fantastique. So I particularly used a lot of fabric in that piece. Fabric underwater fabric becomes completely weightless and is able to totally come alive, and it becomes actually a dancer. It becomes choreography. It becomes actually pure movement. It becomes music that's made visual. And but I'm a puppeteer. It was a puppet show. For me, there were some puppeteers who kind of questioned, wait, is this puppetry? Because it doesn't have eyes. There was some puppetry journal who kind of debated whether or not that actually was puppetry. And I will sort of believe that it's the intention that makes it puppetry. I'm a puppeteer. And we were all puppeteers backstage behind that tank, pulling these things on sticks and strings, kind of like an old-fashioned puppet show. We were hidden backstage. There was a little curtain that went up. We were all moving stuff on sticks and strings, but the things that we were moving around were just the things that they were, and they weren't meant to be something else. Of course, lots of people look at the show and they see things. They see faces, they see sea creatures, they see constellations, they see kind of whatever's on their mind. It's sort of a Rorschach test. But the intention, if I made something and too many people said, oh, that looks like a crab, it was out of the show. It had to be pure. It had to be a pure shape and a pure form. And it was a long time ago, and I was just in my 20s, and it was just a sort of youthful exercise to try something done with some flair, and it had a great piece of music, and it sort of led to a whole other career for me of working with music. There's as I kind of went along, I found actually other pieces that sort of actually approach this idea, even though they weren't calling themselves puppetry. So, but I think they come from the same spirit. So notably, Alexander Calder, the sculptor, he did several set designs, and there's one, I'm just going to show a video of it in particular here, to Eric Satie's Socrate. And it was actually it was created first in 1936, and then it was remounted in 1975. And it was a kinetic stage decor. That was kind of all that was on stage. It was this idea of a ballet, and the dancers were these objects, and the objects were just pure form. And I know when I found this, I thought, oh yeah, this is on the same track. Of course, I don't think Alexander Calder was saying that he was doing puppetry, but to me, when I see this, it is definitely in the vein of the spirit that I'm working with. Whether you call it puppetry or not, it's animating the inanimate. It's bringing these shapes and forms to life and putting them in a theatrical context so that we're experiencing them as an audience in time. And apparently Calder said this was a real game-changing moment for him. This was in 1936. This was a moment when he started to do really large-scale works. He did several set designs. This is the one that's kind of the most famous one. And it's, I don't know, I just love this work. I love the simplicity of it. And then as I got into this, I learned a lot more of other people working in the theater who are working with abstraction and creating theatrical moments with objects that are abstract. Juan Miro did a lot of actually theatrical pieces. The director Robert Wilson, who's still working today, he does a lot of stuff that is actually very pure form on stage. There's an incredible moment in Einstein on the Beach where there's a column of light that starts horizontal and it slowly raises to vertical, and then it slowly shoots out of the stage space, and it's one of the most thrilling theatrical moments you can experience, and it's just a pure white line on stage. So I love this simplicity, this really elemental thing of just maybe two shapes getting close together, or moving apart from each other, or standing up. And whether or not we project onto it, because we always have a tendency with something tall like that, you start to see a human form. But whether we do that or not, there's these elemental shapes that have their own power. And I admire what Calder did. I think it's beautiful. It's also very puppety because it's like the way that piece is animated. It's done with strings, or you can't see who's doing it. So it's very old-fashioned puppetry in a way. Lots of contemporary puppetry now has the puppeteer visible, like War Horse or Avenue Q or The Lion King, or things that people know a lot. And this is like, this thing is moving by itself. It seems alive, and that's very exciting. Actually, so there's lots of different forms of puppetry when we try and break down puppetry, which is, I'm teaching a puppetry class here at Stanford, and you're always sort of required to at least touch on the basics. There's hand puppets, there's string puppets, there's glove puppets, there are rod puppets. These are different techniques that exist around the world, and there's also the great tradition of shadow puppetry. So shadow puppetry is a huge and important puppetry tradition, particularly in Asia. And the idea of manipulating light and creating actually shapes and using that sort of idea of seeing shadows and us imbuing meaning to a shadow is, a very profound concept that Plato spoke of, and it's a very powerful theatrical medium, using light and bringing light to life. And actually, I think that one of the greatest expressions of this in an abstract form are the psychedelic light shows of the 60s. And I'm just going to put on one of them now. When I superheroes, which is Joshua White, the Joshua Light Show. Let's see, is this it? Yeah. So there were many different companies actually that started doing psychedelic light shows in the 60s. Joshua Light was one of the most famous ones, working on the East Coast in the Fillmore East. And then in San Francisco, the Brotherhood of Light was probably one of the biggest ones. There's also Glenn McKay, who was doing stuff in the East Coast. There was a whole world of these guys doing stuff. And all this stuff was performed live, completely live, with a live band. Here they're performing with Deep Purple. Doing this incredible light, these shadow shows with light, and bringing the music to life with, and it's not a computer, it's not recorded. I mean, of course we're watching a recording of it right now, but this was done live. In the same way that a puppeteer would work with a puppet that might be shaped like a person. It's the same impulse that Joshua uses when he's pouring ink into a Petri dish and then squishing it in time for the music and making that image become alive. So, I don't know, I feel a huge kinship also with these artists. Joshua, actually, when I did Symphony Fantastique, was one of these people who burst backstage and said, "Man, you're onto something. We're kindred spirits." And he's been someone that I've known for a long time now. And he's still working. He's still doing light shows, and still does them completely live, completely analog. It's not digital. It's not recorded. And uses mirrors. The classic thing is using two Petri dishes and squishing ink between them so you can kind of squish it to the beat. We'll have several different sources of light so you can move from one light source to another so things can crossfade like a filmic look. But it's very live. It's really puppetry. And I, in a way, I always felt like Symphony Fantastique was a three-dimensional version of this. So I would look at this for a long time. I could look at this forever, and actually it goes on for a long time. Anyway, the psychedelic light shows, fantastic. Puppetry, or abstraction as performance in real time in front of an audience, live, bringing elements, Petri dishes and little mirrors and ink and dyes, and creating a performance with these materials that are these like fabric underwater have an incredible quality to them that has nothing to do with, we may look at them and say, oh, that looks like an amoeba, or it looks like something we've seen in outer space, but they're not trying to look like anything. They're just being the materials themselves, and the performers are just creating the conditions for these materials to express themselves. And frequently, this work is done with music, and these bubbles and swirls of ink become the dancers. I don't know if that worked. I want to show you something also of an artist who actually defines herself as a puppeteer, because most of these other artists I've been showing you don't necessarily consider themselves puppeteers, but we're all kind of meeting in the same place. Hannah Tierney is an artist, a real hero of mine, who's been working in New York City since 1980. She's from East Germany. And she creates these incredible performance pieces that are really a gallery installation brought to life. They're all worked by strings, similar to the Calder piece, and she has this fabulous control panel on one side of the room where she pulls strings and will animate these shapes. And she'll do all sorts of, frequently she'll do something actually with quite traditional texts like Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, or or a Gertrude Stein text. she did a great piece actually to Flatland, which is the Edwin Abbott sort of Victorian novella about shapes in different dimensions. And it's like, who else could tell that story live than somebody like Hannah, who's working with shapes and pure form in this way. She really does, though, consider herself part of the puppetry tradition. She's Czech by way of East Germany, and actually the Czechs are really the sort of the heart of puppetry in Europe. The sort of fabulous wood-carved puppets, incredible folk tradition of puppetry is this really strongest in the Czech Republic. And she brings that sort of craft, but with this different rigor in looking, as I really look up to what Hannah's done. She's gone much farther than I have, and really pursued this for a long time, this idea of puppetry, this abstraction of puppetry, and the purity of gesture, the purity of form and shape in time, in movement, in front of an audience. And it really is like her space. It truly is like it is like a gallery. I mean, it seems like an art gallery. You could appreciate these objects if they were completely still. But then there's this fabulous animation of it. And the moment, the theatrical moment that happens, that begins and ends, that is ephemeral. That is for an audience. Hannah Tierney. So Hannah Tierney is really a kindred spirit of mine as a puppeteer and an artist.
Cloud of brownish mud.
I'm going to just jump to this kind of last and recent piece of mine, which is ever since I did a Symphonie Fantastique almost 17 years ago, people said, wow, you should do that with a full orchestra. That was so cool. And Symphonie Fantastique was in a pretty big tank of water, but it was still limited. I mean, it was about as big as a car. And but that's not something that can play with a full orchestra. So originally, when we first did the show, we did it with a recording. It was just kind of done in a basement space, an alternative space in New York, called the Hero Arts Center. And we used a recording, and the show has continued to be presented over the years, and now we do it with a piano, which is really thrilling, to have live music and to have it be as if the pianist is actually making these materials come to life. It's very, it's really theatrical. But I always wanted to do that, to actually take this work to the higher level, to the bigger stage, to do something with a full orchestra, to use the classical canon, and to really go big. And the nice thing about a lot of puppetry is that it stays, some of it is miniature, so it makes it kind of manageable. You can do it, you can pull it off. And over the years, I started to get more notches in my belt of doing bigger shows, or doing some set designs for people, or working on an opera, and working on a bigger scale. And besides experiments like Calder's Socrates, there's also, I had seen, before Symphonie Fantastique, and when I was when I was studying in France, the Ballet Russe, who created, who really was where the Rite of Spring came from, had done other pieces, including notably a piece called Fireworks, which was the Italian futurists got together and made some strange, what they called a ballet without dancers, which was a stage design that was intended to move, but it didn't move because of some union issues, which sometimes still happens with puppetry. It's a very cross lines with what's a performer and what's a set piece, and it's sometimes hard to negotiate that But this piece, it was also a piece by Stravinsky, and it inspired, actually, inspired Symphonie Fantastique in many ways. I was asked to participate in the 100th anniversary of The Rite of Spring, which was in 2013, The Rite of Spring, which premiered, in 1913, around the time also that abstraction was really this was what was happening in art. There was all kinds of new ways of seeing visually in the world, and The Rite of Spring was a new kind of music and a new kind of dance. So 2013 was the 100th anniversary of it, and I was asked to create something for it, and I had the nerve to say, could I do it with a full orchestra? Could I do a big giant thing? And it premiered at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Emil Kang said yes, and I did not only fireworks, but another Stravinsky piece, Pulcinella Suite, and then The Rite of Spring. And I did them on the terms of Symphonie Fantastique as a purely abstract piece. It wasn't underwater, because that's too much water. But I did use a lot of fabric, because I've found, frequently people wanted to see the imagery that had happened underwater in Symphonie Fantastique, and the way that you could do that is with silk, to kind of create that same fluidity in the air, and that same fabulous movement and freedom of movement that the fabric had underwater, using something really light like silk. So I'm going to just show you some of The Rite of Spring. So this was when it was premiered in Chapel Hill, and then we just did it at Lincoln Center, which was amazing to do it in New York and to do it at Lincoln Center. It's really hard to get the scale of this if you don't see people. You will see people in a moment. But the stage is 50 feet across. And the orchestra is in the pit in front, like a traditional ballet. Just these are the dancers, these are the performers. And I choreograph them to interpret the music, but they're not necessarily meant to mean anything. Of course, I have all kinds of little things I tell myself, but for the audience, I just want people to appreciate the purity of the form. Enormous sheets of paper that we're able to actually destroy on stage. All this work was actually originally developed. The first time I had a sort of teaching assignment was at the University of Maryland, and worked with my students to develop this. And really, a university allows you to work in a way that you cannot work in New York City. You can't get on stage in New York City without it costing thousands of dollars each minute. So being able to work at the University of Maryland and also Chapel Hill helps create this piece. Another element that I use is smoke. So smoke and the air. And really, the silk, what the silk does, like in the water, silk actually renders the air visible, so you actually see the air, and that's what happens with smoke. When you put smoke, you actually see the air in action. And in the piece, because the piece, so many people know The Rite of Spring as the story of sort of there's a chosen one. eventually we do leap into that there's a human form. That the human form emerges at the very end as this dramatic moment when we've been watching this entire ballet all evening long, and the focus has been on these shapes, and suddenly there's a human being thrust into the center. That's was kind of a conceptual way for me to just make that human form be so important. And the idea of the sacrifice, the Rite of Spring, the chosen one, the original story of the Rite of Spring. So, yeah. So anyway, that was I really just wanted to share some videos with you, something from the puppetry world, from different contexts that kind of show where abstraction is meeting performance, at least is how I see it. And I'd love to open it up to questions or comments if people have questions. Yes.
What will you be doing here this year?
So I'm teaching a course in puppetry in the theater and performance studies department. I did it last year, and I'm doing it again this year. And this year I'm actually doing it within the confines of the design school because it's sort of just another interesting context for my work. I'm only here for a quarter, so it's short to share everything. I consider myself really, truly a visiting artist, not as much a professor. I just really want to share myself with students, and I show them some of my more representational puppets. I show them some more abstract stuff, and then I encourage them to make something. And I kind of show them lots of videos of other work and basic, kind of the sort of basic traditions that exist out there, and the huge range that's possible in puppetry. And then I just sort of encourage them to make something of their own. So that's what they've been doing. And actually on Tuesday is our final class showing, and the students will, at 4 o'clock in the Prosser Theater, they'll be presenting their pieces that they've been developing. And then we've also have a small group piece that we've done together too. So, yes.
How do you present such a large display of shadow and light? I can't even imagine a 50-foot stage and being able to have the shadows do what you wanted them to do. Does that make sense?
You practice. I mean, it's like anything. It's like a dance. It's like rehearsal with a dancer. I mean, it's about space too, particularly with shadows. If you're doing stuff with shadows, it's all about space. So the relationship to space, you need to have enough space to, the farther back you are, the bigger the shadow gets. I mean, Rite of Spring used just a little bit of shadows. It really was mostly about the three-dimensional forms. Yes.
Those ink things, what looks like ink, which remind me of the psychedelic light shows. Was
Yes.
that shadow?
That was actually a projection. So that was a recorded thing that I used. Yeah. I would have loved to just have some ink go right on the stage, but I couldn't. They would not have invited me back. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about your process? Like for the Rite of Spring, do you sketch? Do you get materials and bodies to play in space? Like how do you develop the composition?
I did begin at the University of Maryland, and I started with really pure forms. So I start with, and always when I do a workshop, I work with silk and I work with cardboard. So I work with something that's hard and I work with something that's soft. And then I just start to play, and you put on the music and you start to play. And there's things that you go, wow, that was so cool. Did you see that? That was so perfect. And there's things that just start to land. And you start to kind of acquire a vocabulary. And you start to make a list of things that were neat. And then it just starts to, it maybe leads to something else. You think, oh, maybe we should add smoke. And you just play. So you just have to keep playing. I mean, I did know, originally I knew that I wanted to begin the Rite of Spring with the falling silk, because there's something elemental about a curtain. I use curtains a lot in my work, and a curtain is also, it's like, to me, it's like a giant puppet. That gesture of a huge curtain opening is so exciting, or a curtain closing. And we're so used to it. And to see a curtain that opens or goes up is something that signifies a theatrical moment. But to have a curtain fall is a surprise. And it's still the same thing, it's a reveal, but it falls, and it's sort of a shock. The Rite of Spring is shocking. The music is shocking when it first begins. It still is today. It has that kind of shock when the Arbors of Spring first hits. So I knew I wanted to have silk curtains falling, and that there's nothing like silk falling. So I started with that idea, and I don't know, you just play around. I mean, I was lucky to have the time and the support of the university in particular to play. Because this is that kind of show needs space above all. I can't rehearse it in a time and space. I can't, I need the stage. In a way, the stage is my giant puppet. I'm working all the line sets and the ropes and the traditional mechanisms of the theater. I need to play with those. But I did actually do, it's not totally true, I did a miniature version of the Rite of Spring with 3 people in a smaller space where, again, it was at the University of Richmond. I was invited to do something. I said, let's just do the Rite of Spring. I brought 2 other people with me and some silk and some cardboard, and we just went for it. And some of it was good, and some of it wasn't. And we kept the good stuff as much as I could, and tried to make it bigger. Yes.
So you're manipulating this. How do you see the effect? Are you videoing it?
When I am a performer, and even as a performer, I think that a puppeteer has an innate sense of how something is supposed to look. You know, this kind of thing as a kid I would do, where you hide behind the couch and you kind of, you know what this looks like to you. It's sort of this developed sense you have. But puppeteers work with a mirror a lot, if you can, and then, yes, you'll film it and watch it as a really useful tool. For the Rite of Spring, I'm not performing in it. I'm the director, and so I stay out front, and so I can see it. But I do use the video to show people. It's so much easier to use a video for when people can see it themselves. It says volumes. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question about your use of the stage and proscenium art and the dimensionality, sort of two-dimensionality of the stage, because in the women puppeteers work you were showing, it looked like more it was a 3-dimensional gallery space. And it kind of relates also to the Calder. I know that one of Calder's original models for the mobile was Josephine Baker, the dancer, that he then turned into a wire, kind of abstraction of her. That's the beginning of the mobile. But again, that's something that exists more in a 3-dimensional space, and the work that I've seen of yours usually is happening in a proscenium, sort of 2-dimensional flat stage, sort of, as it were. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, have you done stuff, I'm making this up, in the round, or would that be revealing too much of the puppeteer behind it?
Because my work is so visual, I generally have done a frontal relationship with the audience so that I know you're all looking at something. In general, I've done that. But I have done things in the round. It's, with the tank, for example, it's really cool to watch the show from the back, and we would allow people to watch from the back, actually. But they were watching the kind of how it's done backstage for the show that's happening in the front. It depends, because there's so much more sort of puppetry performance where we include the puppeteer and we can see them in action and people enjoy that. It's actually thrilling to have the audience on 3 sides, for example. War Horses was conceived that way because it's so extraordinary to see the way those puppeteers work. But it is true, I mostly have done stuff in the front because I'm so visual and I want the picture to be, I really, in many ways, especially when I'm directing it, I'm sure there are a lot of artists like that, you're sort of doing it for yourself. It needs to be cool to you. And I just want people to have that same view too. So the piece that I have is this piece called Dobugayashi, which is all these Japanese sliding doors that open and that open and that open and that open. You really need to sit right in the center for that show. It's just not the same. Yes.
Related to that point of view, I was thinking when, especially in that last section of Rite of Spring where the cloth goes up, it's kind of whether to what extent you're influenced by magic, because big scale magic like David Copperfield and stuff like that is also using moving big objects and creating illusion and surprise and some of the things you're doing, but within the context of magic.
There is something, of course, I mean, the idea, like the calder, where there's strings and you can't see the strings, and it's how's it being done, is really cool. It's really, there's something actually fantastic about that. When you, actually one of my students now is actually an economics major, but he's an amateur magician, and it's really interesting his, what he kind of wanted to explore. And there are many tricks that are done with a string, with, you know, a card in your hand and there's an invisible string. There's lots of magic tricks that are done with an invisible string. And it looks like something is alive. You know, it makes it look like something, we actually believe something's alive if you can have a hidden means to animate it. So I don't know, I feel a real kindred spirit with magicians. I generally am someone who likes to, I don't so much do puppetry where you see the puppeteers at work. I like to kind of keep them backstage in an old-fashioned way. Yes.
So when you work with a choreographer like Christopher Wheeldon or on Broadway with a puppeteer, and your puppetry is part of the Broadway show, do you make a small model first? Like that giant tree that you made for Cinderella, that is something which I can't imagine you just put it up there fully formed on the stage. And did you find a way to make it small first and then?
I did, well, I did drawings of it, but then I actually did, it was, because essentially all that stuff has to be flat so that it can fit, you know, everything's so tight on a clear stage. So all those, the tree trunk and the different kind of, the bows of the tree had to be flat pieces. So I would work it out actually I would make a cutout of a tree, and I don't know, I made it about this big. And then I could arrange the different pieces, like this piece would go here, and as the tree kept moving, I could say, you know, here's different positions of these. But yeah, I would do it definitely in miniature.
And then you took it to a shop and had the woodwork done.
Yeah, and then that was all done by a CNC shop. I mean, generally I do a lot of my own stuff. I build my stuff myself. Like in Cinderella, there was a small tree at the beginning, and that was built by me or under my shop so that I could supervise it, because ballet dancers had to become puppeteers to handle it. Whereas the tree actually was something that I was working within the normal constraints of a fly system, and the guys on the side who are pulling ropes that make scenery go up and down are working with what their technique is. And so I'll make a thing that works for them. And I say, hey, you guys are puppeteers. You're bringing this to life. And I try and give them that intention and imbue them with that intention. But for the smaller things where I'm training people actually to really animate something with a new technique, I kind of need to do it myself. I was going to do a little experiment and invite you to come upstairs. And when we were doing this preparation for this, they asked me to take some photos, and they said, would you bring a puppet? And I said, oh, I'll bring a piece of silk, actually, because that's more what I'll talk about. And we took lots of pictures. It was a day the museum was closed, and I brought some silk, and we took all these pictures around the space with me kind of animating a piece of silk, and it was fun. And I thought, generally in a talk like this, I would do some sort of demo right now with a piece of silk. But I thought, how about we go upstairs and I do it upstairs in kind of where a lot of the action paintings are. And I'm just gonna kind of animate a piece of silk. And it'll be a sort of performance where I'm animating some silk and you're actually in the presence of other permanent action paintings that we're making in ephemeral action paintings. And then you're welcome to visit the rest of the museum until it closes at 8.
Before we go upstairs, I'm fascinated about your experiences at a puppetry school. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'll just say mostly that a school is a school is a school. And mostly, the most useful things at a school are when you actually disagree with your professors and you think that you know better and you start to form your own opinions. And that's like the best thing. That's the very best thing. And that's kind of what happened for me. They taught you basic techniques and they had the strings and the hands and the gloves and the shadows and stuff. But when you started to say, but this is what's missing, that's when you actually, and I would have never been able to hit on what's missing if I hadn't been provoked like that. So I'll see you upstairs. We'll meet in the West Gallery. You can go by the elevator.